Welcome, undergrads and future executives. Let's dive right into this explainer on the Sustainable Management Toolkit. Today, we're going to bridge that gap between abstract academic theory and a rigorous, data-driven operational system. We are moving way beyond the basic idea that sustainability is just good for the planet and looking at how it actually functions as a hardcore competitive strategy. This briefing is designed specifically for you as you step into management roles to give you the exact frameworks you need to succeed. Think of this as your executive briefing. Here's our agenda. We'll cover the Sustainability Strategy Toolkit, life cycle assessment, reporting frameworks, tracking carbon and energy, circularity and supply chains, and finally, wrap it up with a practical test. Section 1, the Sustainability Strategy Toolkit, a new paradigm. Okay, let's crack open this toolkit with a pretty massive mindset shift when it comes to corporate governance. For the longest time, business sustainability was treated as this completely separate, isolated corporate function. But you know what? Sustainability is no longer just about ticking regulatory compliance boxes. It's a strategic lever. It's for differentiation, reducing your risk exposure, and building serious stakeholder trust, which, by the way, often translates directly into cheaper access to capital. What we're talking about is integrating environmental, social, and economic dimensions. This allows you to assess trade-offs and synergies across the whole organization. Firms that measure, report, and optimize this stuff are literally building a massive competitive advantage. Moving on to Section 2, Life Cycle Assessment, from Cradle to Grave. So our first major analytical tool is the Life Cycle Assessment, or LCA. This forces us to look way beyond our own internal operations and out into the entire value chain. Why? To avoid something called problem shifting. An LCA isn't just a technical tool, it's a whole way of thinking. As a manager, you want to avoid problem shifting at all costs. For example, say you decide to use a lighter packaging material to save on transport emissions. Sounds amazing on paper, right? But if that new, lightweight packaging is suddenly impossible to recycle later on, you've just unintentionally caused way more environmental harm during the disposal stage. An LCA prevents you from having those kinds of blind spots. The LCA methodology actually follows 4 key steps, taking raw data on material inputs and energy and translating it into something you can actually use. First up is goal and scope definition, where you map out the purpose of your study and set your boundaries. Second is the Life Cycle Inventory Analysis, or LCI, which is all about collecting data on inputs, energy, and emissions at every single stage. Third, we have the Life Cycle Impact Assessment. This is where you translate all that raw inventory data, like tons of CO2 or liters of water, into specific impact models, like climate change potential or regional water stress. And finally, interpretation and decision support, where you take those findings and turn them into actionable management decisions. By running through those 4 steps, you're going to locate your hotspots. Hotspots are the exact pressure points in your supply chain that need immediate strategic intervention. Finding these, that's how you build the business case for doing an LCA in the first place. You link these environmental improvements directly to cost savings, risk reduction, and brand reputation. This is absolutely vital, especially if you're in regulated or export-oriented markets, or in super energy-intensive industries like construction materials or chemicals in the Asian and Middle Eastern manufacturing sectors. Section 3, Reporting Frameworks. We're looking at GRI and CDP, the language of transparency. We are definitely talking about the language of transparency here. Once you actually measure your impacts, you need standardized frameworks to communicate them to the world. First, we have the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. This one provides standardized indicators for a really broad look at your environmental, social, and economic performance. It's meant to communicate your holistic impact to a wide range of stakeholders, including local communities. Then we have the Carbon Disclosure Project, or CDP. The CDP is hyper-focused on climate change, water security, and deforestation. It's all about transparency in your carbon emissions and climate risk exposure. Both of these frameworks strengthen your organizational legitimacy, and honestly, they're increasingly aligning with strict regulatory requirements across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Section 4. Tracking carbon and energy, specifically mapping emissions. When you're measuring climate impacts for those reporting frameworks, you have to map your carbon using 3 distinct scopes. Let's start with Scope 1. This covers the direct greenhouse gas emissions that your company physically owns and controls. So if you operate a fleet of delivery trucks, the fuel burning in those vehicles, that's Scope 1. If you own a manufacturing plant, the emissions right out of your furnaces or boilers fall in this category too. It's the most direct layer of your footprint. Next up, we have Scope 2 emissions. These account for the indirect emissions tied to the electricity, heating, or cooling you purchase just to keep the lights on and operations running. You don't own the power plant generating the electricity, sure, but because your organization is consuming that power, those emissions reflect the carbon intensity of the energy you rely on. This is exactly why corporate procurement teams are investing so heavily in renewable energy certificates right now. And finally, Scope 3. This one encompasses everything else in your value chain, and it is massive. It includes the raw materials your suppliers extract, your logistics networks, how your end customers actually use your product, and what happens to it when it's thrown away. Fun fact for you, for a lot of consumer brands, Scope 3 accounts for 80 to 90% of their entire carbon footprint. So as an undergrad business student and a strategic thinker mapping out a complex global enterprise, I want you to consider this question. Where do you suspect your biggest emissions challenge is actually going to hide? Is it in the stuff you control directly, or is it somewhere else entirely? Take a second to really think about that. Well, according to the Energy Institute, it is almost always Scope 3. Yep. So the crucial takeaway here is that achieving true sustainability requires intense, long-term collaboration with your suppliers and your customers. You can't just fix up your own factory and call it a day. You have to trace the entire web. This is exactly why tracking carbon intensity indicators, like emissions per unit of output, is absolutely critical for managers trying to set real reduction targets. Section 5. Circularity and supply chains. It's time to reimagine the economy. Tackling those massive Scope 3 emissions means we have to reimagine the economy itself. We've got to transition away from the traditional linear model, that old take, make, dispose way of doing business. It's fundamentally unsustainable. Instead, we have to embrace a circular economy. This is where products are kept in use and natural systems get regenerated. You design products specifically for durability and modularity. You use business model innovations like product as a service. Think of Philips providing lighting as a service to airports. They retain ownership of the physical bulbs, and the airport just pays for the light itself. This naturally incentivizes you to build things that last and can be easily repaired, remanufactured, or recycled in a continuous closed loop. But to make this circular vision a reality, ethical sourcing has to be a strategic priority. You have to embed sustainability into how you select suppliers and manage contracts. We're talking fair labor practices, safe working conditions, and responsible material extraction. Plus, you need digital transparency and traceability systems just to monitor compliance. Ultimately, it's about moving away from purely transactional relationships to long-term supplier capacity building. You have to actually train and invest in your partners to improve their standards. That's how you manage reputational and operational risks across these incredibly complex global networks. And honestly, whether you're navigating strict European regulations or trying to drive renewable energy adoption in rapidly urbanizing Asia and Middle Eastern markets, these principles are universally critical. As the source material points out, in regions like the Middle East and Asia, renewable strategies using solar and wind are highly favorable and vital for long-term resource security. All right, final section, number 6, the practical test. Let's apply your toolkit. Now, let's put this executive toolkit to the test with your syllabus challenges. Challenge number 1, mapping a messy fair trade coffee supply chain. You'll be given a scenario full of vague sourcing regions and data gaps, like super high energy use and roasting. Your job is to take that mess and categorize the impacts into Scope 1, 2, and 3. Once it's mapped, you and your teams will strategically debate the most urgent intervention needed to actually maintain the integrity of that fair trade certification. Challenge 2 is conducting a mini LCA on an everyday item, like a cotton t-shirt. You'll write a report tracing its life from cradle to grave, and you must identify its ultimate environmental hotspot. Spoiler alert for the t-shirt, it might just be the energy your consumer uses to heat the water in their washing machine. Crucially, you have to propose real solutions. Give me one technical improvement, like switching manufacturing energy sources, and one behavioral improvement, like nudging consumers to use cold water washes. So, as you dive into these real-world assignments, I want you to ask yourself a serious question. Are you just going to manage for basic compliance, ticking boxes to avoid fines?
Or are you ready to use this toolkit to architect regenerative business systems that leave your competitors in the dust? The choice of how you build the future is entirely yours. Good luck with your mapping.